Welcome, everyone. So, this past weekend, I have been playing a tournament in Prince Edward Islands where we were blessed to have Hikaru Nakamura with us, who came in to play more games on his path to the candidates. So, I was also personally happy to get to play with him, and I was even more happy, as you can imagine, to make a draw. And I have been looking at some of the recaps by both Gotham Chess, Hikaru, and some other streamers, and I thought it's good for me to dispel some notions about the game, about what I was thinking during the time, about the sacrifice on F7 that I'll show you later, and some of the thought process that went into my mind. So, as you can tell from the title, okay, let's just get this out of the way. The title is going to be a little tongue in cheek. Of course, you cannot force a draw against Hikaru. But I told myself before the game starts, I said, let's keep it simple and let's take away any potential chances because I am white and it's easier to try and keep it simple with white, right? And not get in trouble. So that's why we have the Rossolimo, which I know pretty well and which we're going to start with today. One last thing as we get started, two quick announcements. Number one, I still have one or two spots available for my private lessons during the weekdays. And the last thing is, I did release a book recently in September called Best Stories in Chess. And if you'd like, you can check it out on the Amazon link that I'll put down below. With that being said, let's take a look at the Rossolimo and what went on here. So the reason why I went for the Sicilian Rossolimo is I looked at his previous games recently that he played in the Ohio tournament and against other players around my level, and it seems like he was very consistent with what he played. He didn't like to switch it up that much. He liked to play the Sicilian, and there I could predict what type of positions I'm gonna get. Whereas if I played something like Knight f3, there is no telling what he would have thought of. Maybe King's Indian, maybe not. I have no idea. So for that reason, I said, let's just get something I'm comfortable with. And I was lucky to have 10, 15 minutes to look at this line very briefly before the game. And I saw a Carlsen Caruana game where Carlsen went for this knight g5 line, and that kind of influenced the course of this game. I also saw what to do against Queen c7, and I already had games there against another French Grandmaster, Philippe Schlosser, I want to say, which went something along the lines of castle short, and then it was knight d4, followed by knight takes, pawn takes, and knight d5. And after pawn takes, we had this fascinating position with, I want to say, c4. And there is a gambit here. I think it's something like a6 and b4. I managed to win the game in the end. This was the Bischwelle Open 2 years ago, but it was a very chaotic game. So I said, let's try out knight c3 again. Let's see how it will go. So after knight c3, of course, in some training games, I did play e5 before. So maybe that's what influenced Nakamura's choice, that he didn't think I'd go for knight c3. I think that's what he said in the video, but I played this several times, so I feel pretty comfortable here. Now, after knight d4, e5, this is the main line, of course. We're trying to punish their lack of development. And after takes, knight d5, knight g5 is the main line. So the Carlsen Caruana game that I had 30 seconds to look at before the round went along the lines of f6. And then after knight e4, I think it was something like f5. And even though black has the bishop pair, these pawns are a little weird. And white can say that this pawn on e5 is very strong. And in the end, I know that I want to say Carlsen played b3, bishop b2, and he managed to overcome the resistance. So that being said, in the actual game, we had h6, which took me by surprise. As you can tell by the time spent, yeah, here's my first real think of, let's say, 12 minutes. And the reason why I was thinking is I was trying to figure out if this was playable at all. Because when I was looking at this before the game, I thought f6 was the only move. At least it was the only move in the Lichess database. And the reason why h6 isn't played more often, as some of you guys saw in the other videos, is of course knight takes f7. Now, here's the truth. I had no idea that this move even existed. Okay, this was a complete blunder on my part. I had no idea this was played. When I saw knight g5, I thought, okay, maybe you want to get a knight to e4, maybe you want to provoke, and I assumed that f6 has to be played for some reason, but I never thought to find out why. Now, I know, very weak of me, I understand, but if they play f6, we do play knight e4. So in my mind, I was just primed. I was ready to go. I'm like, okay, anything you do, knight e4. And the knight is good behind the pawn here, right? Because we're working against the d6 square later on. So imagine we get some knight e4, they play d6, we take, they take, and we get to play some d4. We try to open up the d file and get to that pawn of theirs. That's what crossed my mind when I was preparing for this game. So of course, h6, I looked at many other options because I thought, is this punishable? So this thought did cross my mind, but of course, I didn't find the punishment at all. So after, let's say, queen f3, this was the first thing that came to my mind. We have pawn takes, queen takes, and of course, this is already bad for white because then they have a6, they kick out the knight, they get some rook b8, pawn to b5, bishop b7 coming, and our light squares are leaking here along with the h file, whereas these pawns are, if anything, good for black. They're not weak at all. So for that reason, I had to play, well, I decided to play knight e4. Of course, knight f3 did cross my mind, but we gave up the bishop pair. So I'm trying to do something in the meantime to make up and compensate that bishop pair. I looked at other moves too. I looked at queen h5, ironically. I didn't like this at all for many reasons. Yeah, starting with g6. So I just didn't think it was very promising. They get bishop g7 very soon, and this felt like playing for tricks. He blitzed this out, so I assumed that Hikaru is Hikaru. Of course, he knows something here, and of course he did. And he knew that after h6, we have, let's say, knight takes f7 here, and we have this variation with queen check. Of course, they can't run up here. This is how you get checkmated. And if they block, then we have pawn takes, queen check. And then king g6 is all forced. This is all forced line. After the game, I had to ask him, I'm like, really? Are you going to go for this line if I was to go for this? But what choice did he have? So he said, yeah, he was okay with a draw here. So that answers the question, how to draw Hikaru. Step number 1, make sure that he has a tournament to go to afterwards and he can't really spend much time in your game. Step number 2, make sure he doesn't mind the draw as a result. Okay, and I have a feeling that he didn't mind it because he allowed this line to begin with. So, I mean, I take some of the credit. I played decent chess, but of course, I was lucky to get the draw in the end. Now, after knight e4, we had a6, knight c3, knight takes, and pawn takes. So when I was going for this position, this is also what I had calculated when I played knight e4. And I was preparing for d6, where we have at least pawn takes. So this is the first thing that I saw in my calculation, and I tried to make bishop f4 work, but it wasn't working out so well because they have simply d5 with bishop e6 and bishop e7 coming. I thought this was nothing. And then I started to think about, what if we castle? And if they kick us now, for example, d5, our knight is actually going to greener pastures on h5. So queen f3 is coming, rook e1 is coming, and there is this beautiful line with knight h5, castle, queen f3. We're inching in the general direction, so we can go for 3, 2, 1, kaboom, bishop takes h6. So then after pawn takes, queen g3, queen g7, and if bishop blocks, we always have f4, if nothing else. So this is what I was hoping for, but as I got closer to the position, I reminded myself of that mantra, right? We need to make sure that the position stays simple, Hikaru doesn't get to do his magic, and we have to keep things under control, give him no chances. So bishop f4 did a great job in those two things. So if they take now, this is amazing with queen takes d8, knight takes c5. I was looking forward to that, of course. And they can't play d5 because c5 is hanging. Bishop f5 seemed to be the only reasonable move because g5 is not how you play these positions, right? This is way too early for that. So bishop f5 is basically forced, and knight g3 would be bad. I thought it allowed the bishop to run away. Then they got to play, if they managed to get something like, let's say pawn takes and e6, bishop e7, of course, not blundering g7 at the right point. I didn't like this much because my c2 pawn is going to be weak after the queens go off the board. So That did not appeal to me, so we have to defend that knight and keep him there. That's why we went for this, is to say that we have a pretty knight after all. And after bishop takes, queen takes, d5 is basically forced because we're about to take this guy, right? And they have to take. Of course, I looked at some lines where they played this, but I don't think it's playable, yeah, because they have too many problems and too many weaknesses with d6. And after this, they have a hard time holding all the pawns together, yeah, because d6 is threatened, b7 is threatened, d5 has to be played. Queen f3, and I was pretty happy with the position because we have a lead in development. We got more space here. d5 could be a target, as you'll see in the game, right? Their king may castle short, but then we have h4, h5 in some future. So I know that I'm not worse, right? I don't know exactly how to play the position, but there is a part of me that knows that, okay, I should be fine for now. So e6 has to be played, otherwise I'm going to do it myself. And now we have a choice of plans. Of course, we can go for h4, we can go for h5 and try to attack with rook h3, rook g3. And I knew that during the game, like in the advanced French, they often do these ideas in the Caro-Kann as well. But remember my two rules: just keep it simple and don't give chances. So h4, h5 gives them some chances. And I was a little bit scared that either we get some opposite side castling pawn storm with b4, where he can outcalculate me and outplay me, or he could even castle long with b5, stopping c4. And I didn't really like it that much, even though I knew that I should be perfectly fine. Like h4 is a very principled move. But I thought c4 is keeping it as simple as possible, yeah, because we want to remove any weaknesses just in case, so we don't have them for later. And we basically force an endgame. Because if they allow us to take c takes d, e takes d, then there's always e6 in the air, which they have to be really careful with, because after pawn takes, queen h5 is coming, right? So for that reason, the bishop gets kicked with g5. Now here's something funny. In Gotham Chess's video, he was talking about bishop g3, bishop e3. Bishop e3 didn't even cross my mind. Of course, this would be an interesting try too, because it provokes d4. And after d4, I have to go back and queen c7, where the position's fine. I'm slightly better, but it's still very double-edged. Anything can still happen. e5 is a target. I have to try and defend it. And these pawns by themselves, that's a good structure for me, as far as I can see. But it's not so easy to use those pawns for later on. I can try to play for h4 or f4, try to overprotect my pawn, of course, but this is still double-edged, and I wanted something simple. Bishop g3, on the other hand, I think is just a bad move, because then they get h5, and this is just what they wanted. And even though the computer is going to say, oh, it's fine, you can play h4, g4, run back to e2, and then they play d4, but, this is coming up. This is coming up. Castling long is coming up, most likely. Their pieces have found good squares. This pawn is surprisingly hard to attack. If any sort of f3, they always have rook g8, which is very strong, saying what in the world is g2 doing here? All right. So I may have to play some bishop f4, for example, but this is not simple at all. Okay. I didn't like this sort of position, which is why I said let's keep it simple. And I like bishop d2 because in some cases, the bishop may join even from c3 to protect the pawn, and we get out of harm's way, far away from everyone. We're not as passive as we would be on g3. I didn't like the bishop going to g3 at all. So I thought this was a compromise, not as scary as the h5 positions. But of course, I didn't see bishop e3. I would have probably played it if I did. Anyways, b5. And here, the caveman brain turned on, and I said, no, they're attacking my pawn. I have to take back. Did h4 cross my mind? No. I think most people, if they see two pawns attacking their pawn, they're thinking, oh, I have to do something. If I thought a little bit longer, maybe I would have realized that h4 is stronger now than before. Right? I was actually expecting other moves. I was expecting them to go for bishop g7, and then we get some sort of endgame after pawn takes, queen takes, pawn takes. I thought that was playable, right, with f4 and h4 coming. I did not expect b5. So after pawn takes, queen takes, I think I have to take to protect the pawn on e5, take, And we get this sort of endgame, which is where I went for my long thing. Now, in retrospect, that may actually help my cause because Hikaru's in a hurry. He wants to get out of there and earn his prize money. Of course, he doesn't want to sit around while I think, but I do because I want to be as precise as possible. I know the margin for error is minuscule here, right? If I go astray by a little bit, if I play the wrong move right now, that's where things start to go downhill. So I have to be really, really precise. I say, can I play f4? After pawn takes, bishop f4, I didn't like it that much because this idea of king d7, king e6 eventually dawned on me. And I realized that if we allow this all to happen, then in the long term, their pawns are protected, no problems. My pawns can be weak. My bishop is kind of getting in the way because I can't defend everything, right? I could play bishop g3, but then maybe they have h5, bishop h6, or h4 ideas. I didn't like this position at all. So I thought about h4. But then after g4, then king d7, king e6 is coming again. I thought I had to play f4 to try and stop king d7, king e6, because now this is a much better version. And let's say castle, king e6, I think I gambit the pawn at that point and I try to make the king. So if I get to castle, play f5, I'm very, very happy, which means they have to take. And I spent some time looking at this position. I was trying to figure out what is going on here. I thought about castling, rook g3, rook g1 here, and I was looking at giving up the pawn to try and play for compensation, rook g8. But I realized this is breaking my golden rules. Remember, just keep it simple, don't give any chances. And this is giving way more imbalance that I want the position to have. And it's not even stopping their main plans, right? Of getting the king to f5 one day. I think if Nakamura gets the king to f5, I probably lose. Okay. With that being said, there's only one way that I can stop it, and it's not h4. It's not castling long, even though the computer may say, oh, why don't you castle? I even thought about a4, which I didn't like much because b4 is coming, and this position like a4, b4, c3, a5 is what I didn't like. Because if takes, yeah, it's also unpleasant, rook b8, but this is what I really didn't like. And here come the pawns, right? I'm giving them way too much play. So for that reason, I said, after a while, it took me, let's see how long, something like 15 minutes. 15 minutes to, no, actually, 25, never mind, 25 minutes to figure out that I have to castle here. And only by castling do I get to eat my pawn back with the rook, stick the rook on f5 where I can actually stay active, right? It's all about staying active in such positions. With the other rook coming to f1, the king has a hard time coming in here, and that's the whole point. So I stopped rook f6. Okay, so it took me a while to figure that out. And right afterwards, when I played, Naka plays rook g8, and he blitzes out the next few moves. Rook takes, rook g6. I'm like, what is going on? Like, maybe I'm playing badly, and he just sees everything in the position, and this is like losing, because when you play someone like that, even their aura has an influence on your thought process. Yeah, but then he played it quickly, so I thought, wait, that means he also calculated this, so it must be not so bad. That means he thought it was the critical line. So that kind of lifted my mood, actually, and told me I'm on the right track. So here I thought for a while, and of course I calculated rook f1, which is the most natural move. I did not see anything special after this. I was looking at rook here, let's say rook e7 coming up. I thought he'd play something like rook e7, rook e6. I'd have to play something like rook e1, rook e1 and rook h5. And this is the sort of position I wanted to avoid, because even though I am still pretty active, they have some f6s in the air at the right point. Their king can improve and they can start pushing their majority, where it's not clear what I'm pushing and where, because g4, h4, I'm not really seeing any progress. Yeah, after something like king d7, simply I can't attack f7 anymore. King here, pawn, king here, and I think I'm close to losing, actually. So this is what I wanted to avoid. And if I put my rook on e1 instead, it's not much better, because f6 is going to come with force later. So for that reason, I said, how do we create counterplay? I need counterplay right here. And this is not counterplay because of what I showed you earlier. And I thought, what if we could play c3 first? And that way, after a4, we're much happier with this version after, let's say, pawn to b4, takes, and we have this square. So we can play bishop b3, bishop to d4, and we all have targets. I have a target, they have a target, the c file opens up, and life is good. Also, they can't even play it because they have a bunch of attackers there, right? But even if they could, somehow play rook b8, I'd be happy to play a4, b4, takes, and get that sort of position. The problem is, after bishop g7, I don't quite have the time. And I realized that after playing all this is that a4 doesn't quite work because at least they have rook b8. And the point is, after takes, this rook does a marvelous job of guarding, whereas it's not so easy to guard b2. This is not the sort of position I want. In an earlier round, Michelle Zhang had an amazing game with Hikaru, and she almost held him to a draw in a similar endgame. And I didn't want to find out if I could manage the draw here. So for that reason, we defend the pawn first, and I ask, what are you going to do? c3 has two purposes. First of all, to prepare a4, which is what I thought at first, but also bishop e3, because now d4 is not a move that it was before, because bishop e3, d4 earlier was really annoying, right? Now I stopped the pawns, I stopped them from running because it could be an annoying pawn structure if we allow d4 in the future, right? The king is on e6, d4, any sort of c3 will be met with d3 and c4, and this is where it starts to be lost, right? So I have to stop there majority, right? It may not be the best move in the position, but it's definitely the most solid move, which is what I was going for. Bishop g7, rook f5, we overprotect. And after rook e6, bishop e3, we hit that pawn, we're coming for it. Rook c8, and here was my last thing. I have to be precise here because I'm down to 13 minutes. When you're playing these guys, you double check everything. You're like, did I miss something? Why is my position so good for some reason? How did this happen, right? So that's what crossed my mind. And if I play the basic rook d1, trying to go for massive trades, they can still trick me because of bishop takes, rook takes, and I didn't like bishop takes c3, where after pawn takes, rook takes, I could also go for rook e5, and this is a depressing endgame down a pawn, and I can go for that, where after let's say rook takes, check here. This is a worse version of the game, yeah, because they're winning this pawn, and even if it is drawn by some miracle, it's not likely I'm going to hold this. If they're, let's say, at 2800 really wants to grind me down here, it's going to be very hard. Okay, for that reason, I said let's avoid this altogether. And let's play rook f1, because now I need the rook to be on a dark square so my bishop can save himself. And this is an important intermediate move because it allows rook d1 to come with force. Because now bishop takes, rook takes. I no longer have to worry about this because of bishop f4. This was critical. Okay, where the rook is hanging and the bishop is hanging, and life is good all of a sudden, which is why Hikaru may have to play this. I don't think he had a big choice. Right? Anything else, I just collect the pawn and say thank you very much. So at this point, things become forced. Yeah, my goal is also to force my way out of potential trouble if I can find it. And here I found a way to force this completely dead drawn rook hand game, which I don't think even I would lose. Now, some people were suggesting king f2 is an option as well, just avoiding the bishop because we're gonna win this c5 pawn. This is also interesting, but I think I would just try to force my way out with king takes. They have to take, I have to take, and this is coming up. We're gonna win some pawns, and I don't think that even I can lose an endgame like this. It's gonna be very hard for me. Okay, like maybe if the king comes in and I mess up a bunch of times in time trouble, maybe. But this I can hold, count on myself holding even against a strong player. Okay, so a short game, and he offered me a drop around here, bishop takes h2, which I thought for a second, I said, okay, it's a drawn rook end game. I'm not about to decline it, okay, against Hikaru. Against someone else, if they're 2200, maybe I would think about it. Now, as I said before, he had to run for that qualifier for the Comet Chess Tournament. So, of course, it wasn't exactly an equal game with other circumstances, but I thought that this is a good model game for how to hold off strong players. Yeah, don't give them any chances. Don't give any big complications or imbalances, right? I tried to break the imbalances that we did have. We had some double pawns against space. I tried to break that up too, all right? And if they want to beat you, they have to really show their class in some part of the game, like the end game, or they really have to take big risks. Yeah, like maybe he had to go for takes, and queen d5 at this point and play out this position, which is risky for both sides because they have a bunch of weaknesses as well. All right. So on that note, hope you enjoyed the video and hope you get to draw strong players as well. Until next time, bye bye.